Recently I picked up a handful of Kodak Gold 200 film which I've never shot before, and before blasting through it all I thought I'd see how it performed underexposed and overexposed. Kodak's professional series of films typically deal really well with overexposure, and I wanted to see if the same applied to the consumer level films. How I went about this was I loaded up a Pentax Spotmatic which had recently had all its shutter speeds calibrated with the roll of Gold 200. I found a scene with some highlights, some mids and some shadows. I set the aperture of the lens to f16, which means I could start at 1/1000th, which was 2 stops underexposed, and then shoot my way through the shutter dial up to 6 stops over. If you're not familiar with color negative film, one thing to know is that increasing the exposure will increase the density of the negative, and that the brightness of the image is interpreted during scanning. The lab's job is to give you a normal image, and that can be somewhat subjective. Starting with the normal exposure, flagged in green, we can see the typical Kodak Gold look with fairly good shadow and highlight detail. These negatives were scanned with a Fuji Frontier with no special requests to the lab. Stepping back to -1, we can see the shadows close up significantly and an increase in contrast. I would not be too upset if this was the only image I got back from the lab. Jumping back to -2 stops, and we now have large areas of pure black, which are quite ugly, and the grain is very obvious, even in the bright areas. Now, on the other side, we have 1 stop overexposed, and it's a very similar result to the normally exposed image. The shadow areas have opened up very slightly, giving the image overall slightly less contrast, and there's perhaps a very slight shift to cyan in the sky. 2 stops over is where we get quite a dramatic shift away from magenta towards green, which you can see in the wall area here, the trees in the background, and the brown of the grass around the building. I don't think I would use this image unless I was specifically aiming for this look beforehand. 3 stops over has even less magenta and takes another hit in contrast. There's definitely still an image here that you could bring back to life if you were desperate. 4 stops is quite ugly because the highlights have lost their brilliance. Little change at 5 stops, and then 6 stops really has just a completely destroyed image. So there you have it, Kodak Gold 200. 1 stop either way seems totally fine, and even 2 stops either direction is not a disaster. I will put the full-size JPEGs as a download in the description, and I would be interested to hear about your experience with Gold 200 in the comments. If you want to see more of this, I've already shot some test exposures of Ultramax 400, so check for that in my channel soon.